She shouldn't have been there. Not that close to the road, not in the open, not with a belly so heavy it pulled her frame toward the ground. We were crawling along a rough service track when the grass ahead shifted and a striped shoulder appeared, followed by a head that looked unreal in the heat haze. A tigress, pregnant. Her sides fluttered with fast, shallow breaths, mouth parted just enough to steal air. At first my brain tried to make her smaller, maybe a big cat in the distance, maybe a trick of light. Then she stepped fully into view and my stomach dropped. She took 2 slow steps toward the vehicle and her legs folded. Not like an animal preparing to pounce, but like an animal that had already spent everything it had. She hit the dirt beside the front wheel with a dull thud I felt through the door. My hand went to the handle and stopped. Every rule snapped into place. Don't approach, don't corner, don't become the reason a wild animal panics. But she wasn't charging. She was collapsing. And when she lifted her head again, it wasn't with threat. It was with something painfully close to appeal. Phones came up behind me, reflexive, hungry. I hated it, because the tigress in the dust wasn't a clip. She was a life trying to hold together 2 lives at once. She dragged one forepaw forward, claws scratching thin lines in the dirt. Tried to push up, failed. Her flank trembled with effort. Then she made a sound that raised the hair on my arms, rough, clipped, not a roar. A low chuff, then another, directed at us, as if she'd decided that whatever instinct normally kept her away mattered less than staying alive. I reached for the radio and gave our location. "Pregnant tiger down beside our vehicle," I said, forcing my voice steady. "Needs a wildlife unit and a vet. Fluids. Crate. Now." The answer came back with static, and a word that landed like a sentence. Time. Too far. Delays. "Do what you can until we get there." Until we get there. Outside the glass, she tried again to rise. Front legs straightened, back legs shook, and she collapsed harder than before. Dust puffed around her nose. She coughed, then dragged herself a few inches closer, not fast, not aggressive, closer the way a drowning person reaches for the edge of a boat. That's when I saw the smear along her inner thigh. Not dramatic, not a pool, just enough to make my pulse spike. Complications. Stress. Something wrong. If she went down for good, it wouldn't be one death. It would be a silent chain. I cracked the window a finger width. "Easy," I said, and the words sounded ridiculous. Easy to a tiger. She turned her head, slow, and looked straight at me. The eyes weren't the bright fury people imagine. They were dulled by exhaustion, but they were focused. They are mother's focus, weighing threat against help. Her belly tightened and she flinched. A contraction. My throat went dry. If she was going into labor out here, beside a road that smelled like oil and metal, she didn't have hours. She had minutes. She angled her body slightly, not toward us but toward the grass line, as if placing herself between whatever was inside her and something we couldn't see. My gaze followed. The tall grass wasn't still anymore. Something moved deeper in it, too heavy to be wind, too deliberate to ignore. Another predator. Feral dogs. A human. I couldn't tell. I only knew the tigress could. Her ears flicked. Her breathing grew harsher. The sun climbed, turning the air into a weight. Inside the vehicle, everyone held their breath like that could keep the moment from tipping. I made a decision I knew could ruin us either way. I grabbed the emergency water and a clean cloth. "Stay back," I told the others. "Keep the doors ready, watch the grass, don't run." Then I stepped out. Heat hit me like an oven. The world got louder. Cicadas screaming, my own heartbeat, the soft scrape of her claws as she tried to pull herself upright. I moved sideways, not straight at her, slow enough to look harmless. The tigress lifted her head. Her lips pulled back just enough to show the edge of teeth. A warning, a boundary. I stopped and lowered myself to one knee at a distance that felt both too far to matter and close enough to die. I set the bottle down and slid it across the dirt, gently, letting it roll to a stop where she could reach it if she chose. I didn't move after that. I didn't reach. I didn't pretend I was brave. I just waited, staring at her shoulders, watching for the coil of muscle that precedes a strike. She stared at the bottle. then at me, then back at the grass line. Her ears pinned for a heartbeat, her muscles tensed not toward me but toward whatever was out there, and in that instant, I understood the real problem. The danger wasn't only the tiger beside our vehicle, the danger was what was coming for her, and it was getting closer. The grass shifted again, closer now, and the tigress answered with a sound that wasn't fear so much as command. A deep, vibrating warning pushed out of her chest, low enough that you felt it more than heard it. The movement in the brush paused, then slid sideways, testing. I stayed frozen, one knee in the dirt, palms open and empty. The water bottle lay between us like a question. For a second, nothing happened except the heat pulsing off the ground and her breathing scraping in and out as if her lungs were lined with sand. Then she inched forward. Not with her whole body, just her head and shoulders, dragging the rest because the weight of her belly made everything else impossible. Her nose hovered above the plastic. She sniffed once, twice. Her whiskers trembled. She didn't drink. She looked at me again, and there was a calculation there that made my stomach tighten. A wild animal deciding whether your presence is worth the risk is not a moment you win by being confident. You win by being small, predictable, patient. I slid the cloth out beside the bottle and nudged it forward with 2 fingers, then pulled my hand back as if the dirt itself might burn. Another contraction hit her. Her flank seized. She let out a short, broken sound and pressed her chin into the ground, holding still until it passed. When she lifted her head again, her eyes were wet. Not tears the way humans cry, but a sheen of strain, of dehydration, of pain that had nowhere else to go. Behind me, inside the vehicle, someone whispered my name like a warning. I didn't answer. I couldn't take my eyes off the grass. The brush shifted once more, and this time the shape was clearer. Low, quick, not a cat. 2 shapes, then 3. Feral dogs. Lean, hungry, confident in numbers. They prowled the edge of the clearing without stepping fully into it, noses down, tails stiff. They smelled the blood I had seen, the weakness, the slow breathing. The tigress sensed them too, and with a sudden effort that looked like pure will, she pushed her front half upright. Her forelegs shook violently. Her back legs barely obeyed. She couldn't charge them. She could only show them she still existed. She bared her teeth, and for one sharp moment, the animal she truly was flashed through the exhaustion. An apex predator, even on her knees. The dogs hesitated, but they didn't retreat far. They spread out, trying to find the angle she couldn't cover. My radio crackled again. Unit is en route, 25 minutes. 25 minutes in a moment that didn't have 5. I swallowed and spoke quietly, because shouting can turn fear into frenzy. We need help now, I said, as if urgency could travel through airwaves faster than vehicles. She's in distress. Dogs approaching. The response was all limitations and distance. I cut it off before anger turned me stupid. I looked at the dogs, then at the tigress. Her head dipped. Another contraction. Her belly tightened hard enough that you could see the skin draw. If labor was starting, she wouldn't be able to defend herself much longer. I did the only thing I could do without becoming a threat. I shifted sideways, still low, still slow, keeping my body between the dogs and the tigress as much as distance allowed. I wasn't protecting her with strength. I was protecting her with uncertainty. Dogs that have learned to survive around humans understand one thing well. Humans bring consequences. They don't always know what consequences, but they know it's safer not to gamble. I raised my arms slightly, making myself wider, not advancing, just existing like a barrier. The dogs watched me, heads tilted, ears pricked. One crept forward anyway, boldest of the pack, paws silent in the dust. It took 3 steps closer, then stopped when the tigress snapped her jaws once, air, not flesh. The sound was like a trap closing. The dog flinched. The pack shifted, circling wider. The tigress finally lowered her head to the bottle. Her tongue touched the rim. She drank slowly at first, then with more urgency, swallowing in rough pulls that made her throat flex. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The relief that flooded me was immediate and stupidly human, like I could will hydration into salvation. She drank half, then paused, panting, eyes half-lidded. She nudged the cloth with her nose. I held my breath again. She pressed her muzzle to it, then dragged it toward her chest as if it were something familiar, something that belonged near her. The gesture was small, almost nothing, but it cracked something in me. This wasn't a tiger begging like a person begs. It was a mother using the last of her energy to choose the least dangerous option in a world that had offered her none. From the corner of my vision, I saw another movement on the road behind us, farther away near the tree line. Not a dog, taller. Upright, a silhouette that froze when it noticed our vehicle, then shifted as if deciding whether to approach or disappear. My skin went cold despite the heat. In places like this, feral dogs weren't the only threat. People came to roads like this for reasons they didn't write down. The tigress's ears angled toward that movement too. Her gaze flicked past me, tracking. The dogs paused, sensing it. The air changed. The clearing felt smaller. I backed toward the vehicle without turning my back, one careful step at a time, keeping my body open, hands visible, eyes on everything at once. Inside, someone cracked the door just enough to pull me in if it went wrong. The tigress watched me retreat, and something like alarm tightened her face. Not anger, alarm. She chuffed once, low, almost pleading, and I stopped, because for her, the moment I stepped away, the pack and whatever stood beyond them might become the final decision. I knelt again, closer to the door now, caught between safety and the animal that had chosen us as her last boundary. The dogs shifted forward in unison, testing the space my retreat created. The upright silhouette by the trees moved again. 2 steps, then still. And the tigress, trembling, pregnant, dirt-streaked and struggling to breathe, gathered herself for one more act of courage. She rose higher than she should have been able to, stood on shaking legs and let out a roar that wasn't loud enough to be dominant, but loud enough to say one thing clearly: "Do not take my babies." The sound rolled across the clearing, and for a heartbeat, everything stopped. Dogs, birds, even the distant chatter of people beyond the road. Then the boldest dog lunged, and in the same instant, the tigress's legs buckled again, dropping her straight into the path of it. The lunge broke the spell. The dog covered the distance in a blur of dust and muscle, jaws open, teeth flashing white in the sun. I moved without thinking, shouting, throwing my arms wide, stepping hard into its path. The sound came out of me raw and wrong, but it worked just enough. The dog veered at the last second, snapping at empty air instead of flesh. It skidded, recovered, circled back. The pack surged forward as one, confidence rekindled by motion. Inside the vehicle, doors slammed open. Someone revved the engine, gunning it just enough to throw noise and vibration into the clearing. The dogs hesitated again, confused by the sudden chaos. The tigress tried to rise and failed, collapsing onto her side with a heavy, breathless grunt. Her belly tightened violently. A contraction hit her so hard her claws dug trenches in the dirt. She cried out then, a short, broken sound that cut through everything else. It wasn't a roar. It was pain. "Now!" I shouted, and hands grabbed me, pulling me back as the vehicle lurched forward a few feet, horn blaring, tires spitting dust. The dogs scattered, darting left and right, unwilling to commit to something that made that much noise. They didn't run far. They never do. They just waited, pacing at the edges, eyes fixed. The silhouette by the trees vanished, melting back into the brush as if it had never been there at all. That left us with minutes, not peace. The tigress lay panting, sides heaving, eyes half closed. Her breathing was wrong, too fast, too shallow. Another contraction rolled through her, longer than the last. She arched, then slumped, exhausted beyond dignity. I slid out again, faster this time, but still sideways, still low, carrying the last of the water and a thermal blanket we kept for shock. My hands shook. I forced them steady. The dogs watched me, but they kept their distance now, uncertain. Noise and numbers had changed the math. I spread the blanket slowly, narrating every movement in a calm voice that was more for me than for her. Easy, easy. I placed it near her flank so she could choose whether to touch it. She did. She shifted, dragging the edge beneath her chest, instinctively trying to insulate herself from the burning ground. Her belly tightened again, and this time something else happened. A wet sound, a darkening patch in the dust. My chest locked. Labor wasn't just starting. It was advancing, too fast, too exposed. I looked at her rear, then away, then back again, because not looking wouldn't change reality. A foreleg trembled. Her head lifted, eyes wild for a second, then found mine. She chuffed again, softer this time, a sound that vibrated more than it rang. I realized then that she wasn't asking for help the way people imagine animals do. She was informing me. This is happening. This is now. The radio crackled. Closer voices this time, engines somewhere beyond the road. Visual in 5, someone said. 5 could be an eternity. The dogs crept closer again, drawn by the scent, emboldened by the tigress's immobility. I picked up a flare from the emergency kit and held it without lighting it, weighing risk. Fire can frighten as much as it repels. I struck it anyway. The flare hissed to life, spitting red light and smoke. I kept it low, sweeping the ground in slow arcs, not at the dogs, but between them and her. They backed off, ears flat, whining, unsure. The smoke curled around us, sharp and metallic. The tigress flinched at the smell, then settled, eyes squeezing shut as another contraction seized her. Her breathing turned into a series of harsh, rhythmic pants. I could see the muscles working beneath her skin, the sheer effort of it. Then, unmistakably, the outline changed. Something small pressed against the world from the inside. My heart pounded so hard I thought I might black out. She cried out again, longer this time, and pushed. The moment stretched thin, held together by nothing but will. And then, movement. A slick, dark shape emerged, tiny and impossible beside the mass of her body. A cub, or the start of one. The dogs howled in frustration at the edge of the clearing. The tigress snapped weakly in their direction, then focused inward again on the task that had eclipsed everything else. She pushed once more, and the cub slid free into the dust, motionless at first, a fragile bundle that seemed too small to matter against all that danger. I felt my knees give. "Stay back!" someone shouted from the vehicle. I stayed where I was, frozen between rules and instinct. The tigress turned her head, reaching for the cub with her mouth, but another contraction racked her, stealing her strength mid-motion. She collapsed back, panting, the cub lying inches from her muzzle, unmoving. Seconds ticked by, each one loud. I didn't think. I acted. I crawled forward just far enough to hook the blanket edge with my boot and draw it beneath the cub, sliding the tiny body closer to her without touching it. The tigress's eyes snapped open, her head lifted. For one terrible heartbeat I thought she would strike. Instead, she pulled the cub to her chest with a trembling foreleg and licked it once, hard, rough, urgent. The cub sputtered. A faint twitch. A sound so small it barely existed. Life. The relief was immediate and brutal. I laughed once, a broken sound, then bit it back because this wasn't over. The tigress sagged, exhausted beyond measure. Her breathing stuttered. She tried to rise and couldn't. Her eyes rolled back for a second, then refocused with effort. I looked at her belly and my stomach dropped again. It was still too large. Another cub, at least one more, and she was fading. The dogs paced, the flare burned low, and the engines we'd been waiting for were still not close enough to touch. I realized then what the next minutes would demand. Saving one life wasn't enough. If we hesitated now, we would lose all of them. The engines finally broke through the heat, louder now, closer, the sound of tires and weight and purpose. A wildlife truck burst into view at the bend in the road, then another behind it, dust pluming high enough to paint the sky. The dogs scattered at the sudden arrival, melting back into the grass with sharp, frustrated cries. The tigress lifted her head at the noise, eyes wide, fear flickering across her face for the first time since we'd met her. She tried to rise again, instinct screaming that large things on wheels meant danger. Her body refused. She collapsed back onto her side, chest heaving, and another contraction tore through her so violently she screamed. It wasn't loud, it was desperate. The team moved fast but not reckless, Doors opened and closed. Voices stayed low. A vet dropped to the ground beside me, reading the situation in seconds, hands already gloved. "She's in active labor," he said, calm like a hand on a shoulder. "At least 2, possibly more. She's exhausted." They brought the stretcher frame, not to lift her, impossible, but to build a perimeter. One of them set a screen to block her view of the trucks, reducing the panic that could kill her faster than blood loss. Another placed a long pole with a padded end near her shoulder, not touching, just there, a presence she could track without turning her head. The flare burned out. Smoke thinned. The world narrowed to breath, dirt, and effort. The second cub came fast, faster than the first, sliding into the blanket with a wet sound and a silence that lasted too long. The tigress tried to reach it and failed again. Her head fell back, eyes half closed, tongue lolling. "She's crashing," the vet said. Fluids went in. Gentle pressure. Words meant to anchor. I stayed where I was, out of the way, counting breaths like numbers could hold her here. Then the cub moved. A twitch, a gasp, a thin cry that sliced through the dust and noise. The tigress stirred, pulled both cubs to her chest with a strength that seemed to come from somewhere else entirely, and licked them in quick, frantic strokes. Her breathing slowed a fraction. Enough. They worked around her, never over her. Sedation was measured like a prayer, just enough to dull panic, not enough to steal awareness. When the crate finally arrived, it didn't rush her. It became the world she could enter when she was ready. They guided, coaxed, waited through another contraction that turned her body into a bowstring, and then let it slacken. There were only 2 cubs. Relief rippled through the team, quiet and contained. With help, with patience, with time stretched thin but not broken, the tigress gathered herself and crawled forward, step by shaking step, cubs pressed to her belly, into the shadowed safety of the crate. The door closed softly behind her. Not a slam. A promise. The road fell silent in the way that follows something enormous passing through. The dogs didn't return. The heat felt different now, less punishing, like it had spent itself. We stood there with dust on our faces and sweat in our eyes, watching the crate settle, listening to the low, steady sounds from inside. Breathing, movement, life arranging itself again. The truck doors shut. Engines started. The convoy rolled out slow, careful, as if speed itself might undo what had just been held together. Later, at the rehabilitation center, the tigress would sleep for hours, watched by monitors and people who knew how to read the language of small changes. The cubs would nurse, clumsy and insistent, blind mouths finding warmth by instinct older than fear. She would heal, not without scars, not without cost, but with enough strength left to teach them how to be what they were born to be. Weeks later, when she could stand without trembling and the cubs could tumble and bite each other's ears, she would move to a larger enclosure, and then to a place that smelled less like humans and more like rain and prey and distance. One day, she would step through a gate and vanish into tall grass that closed behind her like a secret. I went back to the road once, months after, and stood where she had fallen. The dust was gone. The marks were gone. It looked like nothing had ever happened there. That's how it usually is. The world erases its miracles quickly. But I remembered her eyes when she chose to crawl toward us instead of away. I remembered the way danger had circled and paused, uncertain, because something vulnerable had refused to give up. This wasn't a rescue because we were brave. It was a rescue because a mother decided to trust in the smallest margin of possibility left to her. Because a few people chose patience over spectacle. Because timing, imperfect and late, arrived just soon enough. Stories like this don't end with applause. They end with quiet, with the knowledge that survival is often a collaboration between fear and hope, and that sometimes help looks like staying still long enough for trust to take shape. If this moment stayed with you, carry it forward. The next story may be different, but the question will be the same. When something vulnerable collapses beside your path, will you pass by or will you choose to stop?